This video is a follow-on from the previous video on Chronicle Services testing framework. As such, most of the project has been built in advance, and we will be going over the additions to this more realistic example, which looks at how services can send DTOs rather than simple strings and values, how we can set up the services framework to call back periodically, but on the same thread as our business logic, how custom setup information can be added to the services configuration file, and how your tests in the YAML tester can be pre-configured with setup data. For this example, we have chosen to expand on the previous account balancer. This version will be able to keep track of multiple accounts. So, under main, we can see the first interface of transaction service, with two method signatures of transaction and accounts. These make use of the account DTO and the transaction DTO. Secondly, we have the balance interface, where we have the account balance value, the account error message, and the balance by account. Now let's look at the DTOs. These are simple plain old Java objects. Firstly, we have the account DTO. It extends self-describing marshable, which entails marshalling and unmarshalling of the DTO to or from the transport data format. Here we can see the components of an account: the name of the account number, and the account balance. Also, while self-describing marshable provides a default toString method, here we have chosen to override this with a custom toString, as we want to define how this is rendered. Secondly, we have the transaction DTO. It also includes the account number, as well as the amount and the entry type. The entry type refers to this enum for the two types of entries, these being debit and credit. Next, let's see our two services. Firstly, the transaction service implements the same interfaces as the previous example, but has this added implementation of periodic update source. This allows our code to be called periodically, so in this example, we will use it to intermittently print the balances. We can also see this implementation in our configuration file, with the addition of this periodic update MS. In this case, we have set it to print our balances every 5 seconds, but in the real world, it may be more realistic that we get our account balances monthly. Back in our transaction service this service also determines what to do if the entry is credit or debit. If it is credit, it subtracts the amount, and if it is debit, it adds the amount. Then, the run transaction service This is here as an example to drive our core service. It prints out our account balance, our account error if it cannot find the account, and the balance by account. Also, the start method gets called upon startup. As you can see, we have input a few examples with the account number, the entry type, debit or credit, and the amount. Then let's take a deeper look at our configuration file. Another addition to it are these two entries for account. We are using our account DTO, and so we have entered the account name, number, and balance. Typically, you would use this section to set up configuration of your servers, perhaps the credentials to a third-party service. But in this example, to keep it simple, we are using this to pre-configure our accounts with these values. Just to point out, we are able to write account here because in our transaction service we use this class alias. If we did not use this, we would have to provide the full path to this class, like this. Finally, let's see main. The line to point out here is the run all, as this is what runs our configuration file. Now, to demonstrate this running, we will run main. Initially, it prints out that our current account has a balance of 100, and our savings account has a balance of 200. These are values from the configuration file. Next, we see the balances in both accounts change. This is due to our inputs in the start method in run transaction service Our current account has these two debits added, and then our savings account has this credit subtracted. After these initial changes to the accounts, the balances continue to print. This is a result of the periodic update MS from the config file, which we set to print every 5 seconds. Worthy to note is that this is also run on the same thread as the rest of our business logic. You may have noticed in main that we delete directories starting with data before we run the configuration file. In order to see what is printed to the queue, we have built this dump class for demonstration purposes. We want to see the output of our transaction queue, So we can add in the path here from our configuration file, and then we can run this. Looking through this output, we can see every single message that is written to the queue, such as this example of a transaction. Periodic updates are also written to the queue file. This number here is the timestamp in microseconds. It is also possible to run this on the shell by making sure we are in the correct file and then using this command. Again, we are able to see the transactions and also the periodic updates. It is also important to have a test for our account balancer. This is very similar to the test we used previously, and again makes use of a YAML tester. It takes in the directory with where to find the YAML files, the output, in this case balance, and a service, in this case transaction service simple. The YAML files we need are under test balance. Let's see what is in them. Firstly, we have the setup.yaml file that holds our account information. We have provided the account name, account number, and we will start each account with a small balance. This is comparable to what is in our configuration file. Next, we have the in.yaml, where we can add amounts. In this case, we have added 2 debit amounts and 1 credit amount. Finally, we have the out.yaml, where we have our expected output. Based on our in.yaml file, our balance of our current account firstly goes up to 200, then it goes up to 250, and finally our savings account should reduce to 190. Now let's go back to balance test, and we can run this. As we can see, there are no errors, and so our test is also working. For more information about Chronicle services or our other products, email us at info@chronicle.software.